he was a war hero.
Qasem Soleimani was no ordinary general. In Iran, he was a national hero.
He's regarded as personally incredibly brave. The troops love him.
A revered figure in Iran and some other places in the Middle East.
Hello and welcome back to Race to 2020. It is 2020. I'm James Morrow here with Jack Houghton, as always, to break down the weird, wild, wonderful, and woolly world of American politics. Welcome to our first podcast for 2020. Great to have you back here, Jack.
Oh, well, thanks for coming in. Obviously, we've had a bit of a break, but it's good to hit back into it.
We've had a bit of a break. Lots of things have happened. We've had so much. We've had what's going on in Iran with Soleimani. We've had the Democrats. We've had impeachment. We've had Ricky Gervais. We've had the left immolating and falling in on itself.
The left's undying love for Jeffrey Epstein and terrorists.
Jeffrey Epstein terrorists, and hatred for anybody who calls them out. So let's just get right into it, Jack. I think the biggest thing that we've seen probably is not impeachment, not even the way that the Democrats...
Which is surprising, really. You've got an impeached president and you've got a looming Senate trial, and it's not even the biggest news.
And it's not even the biggest story. No, the biggest story here has to be that Donald Trump pushed a button on, ordered the killing by a drone strike of Qasem Soleimani. Now, this guy was, as Joe Biden famously said about Corn Pop, a bad dude.
Yes.
He was the head of the IRGC, which was the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Council, and also the Quds Force, which is basically their kind of international special forces terrorist brigade. So he had been responsible for all sorts of atrocities, not only in Iraq, where their Shiite-backed militias had been responsible for attacks on American servicemen, killing 603 of them, the raid on the U.S. Embassy, which was pretty much the last straw, but also his IRGC in Iran recently killed 1,500 Iranians as part of protests against the regime, which is suffering greatly at the moment. So the really interesting thing about this is that this was a targeted strike. This was not, boots on the ground invasion of Iran. It wasn't disproportionate, just strike willy-nilly on a bunch of stuff. It was targeted and calculated, and the Democrats have lost their collective minds.
I think everybody's lost their collective mind. The way that he's being painted, as obviously people would have seen at the beginning, as a war hero, as someone who is brave, as someone who's a ruthless strategist, it's boggling. And the other thing as well to point out, yes, his past indiscretions and obviously his murderous history is one thing.
Indiscretions.
Yeah.
Indiscretions, Jack.
Using their language. If you were to paint him, it's like, oh, well, his indiscretions, etc. He was actively planning an attack on American forces.
Well, even,
This is what they were saying. This was a preventative strike as much as it wasn't a retaliatory strike.
But not only that, though. I think that there's a bigger point in all of this, is that it restores a deterrence factor. Because Iran had, since the Obama administration, and this really is, Obama's and Biden's mess.
Yes.
This, they had the Iran deal, which was essentially an act of appeasement because they decided, well, if we can, make Iran great again, then that will create a balancing force in the Middle East. And there was a whole complicated sort of reasoning behind it, which was largely entirely based on fantasy, the fantasy that they would come around and be responsible actors, and of course, no.
And a lot of the intel was that they were progressing towards their nuclear enrichment.
Yeah.
They were breaching a lot of these, and then this deal that Obama brokered, it didn't let you go in and check to see whether they were even doing the right thing.
And they sent billions of dollars of cash to the Iranian regime, which even Obama at the time admitted, yes, some of this will be used for terrorism. Sorry, but that's just the way it is.
What a disgrace.
So it was a complete disgrace. It was a complete sellout of America and the West. But now, like all of these far left progressive types who dominate in a lot of the media, they're treating him, as the next Che Guevara. The next thing you know, we're going to start seeing stinky hippie kids walking around with Qasem Soleimani T-shirts.
It's almost as if CNN delivered a eulogy for him, as if he's this great... Do you remember the Baghdadi tributes?
Yeah, well, I mean, you remember when they took out al-Baghdadi and, the Washington Post called him an austere religious scholar.
What is going on here?
And now he's this revered general. His troops loved him. The people loved him. Not the 1,500 people of his own that he killed, not them, but everybody else. And then
This is where he said, she said journalism is so atrocious, because they're almost attempting to be balanced by saying, well, on the other side, the Iranian regime.
It is hilarious to me watching a bunch of left-wing progressives, especially progressive women, come out and defend this murderous, barbaric, theocratic regime that oppresses women and that, hangs gay people from cranes and throws them off buildings and makes women dress up in, all sorts of modesty clothing and so on, and will beat you on the street if you show a lock of hair. And yet, all of these women say, oh yeah, big feminist flex here for Qasem Soleimani. There was this one woman, she was a national security correspondent for the Washington Post, and she tweeted a thing where she compared pictures of the mourners for Soleimani with the Trump inauguration.
And it was Russian propaganda, wasn't it, as well?
Yeah, it was just total propaganda, but it's like, is this really how broken you are? Is this how much that you hate Trump? That, hey, this Soleimani, he's drawing the crowds. How cool is he?
They hate Western ideals. They hate capitalism. They hate all of the ideals that America and I guess Australia and all of these great Western countries that are built on.
Well, it's funny.
They hate them so much that people are saying, well, I'm going to move to, like Cardi B is saying, oh, well, I'm going to move to Nigeria.
Well, you have to make sort of a distinction here, between kind of like the old left, the old social democratic left.
How much is hate for America and how much is hate for Trump?
The far progressive left, that other group, which actually just loathes Trump so much, but also, I think, deep down, as I said before about Che Guevara, the parents of this generation, they all thought Che Guevara and Fidel Castro were great. The generation before thought, Stalin was great. There's this thing where they are allowed to basically just undercut and worship anything that undercuts the society, which is the only society in the world that would let people behave the way that they do freely. So there's really a hell of a paradox.
Did you see the Colin Kaepernick stuff where he's tweeting out saying, well, this, America, this attack is just imperialism and everything. It's for people to side with Iran over the USA, to me, it's just absolutely absurd. I mean, think about the thing that I'd actually be really interested to do what you think, because I know you've done a similar trip through Israel with me, but how this is going to play out for some of the US's allies in Israel. I know there's about 100,000 Hezbollah missiles aimed pretty much at Jerusalem and aimed at a lot of these really holy and cultural sites and everything.
Well, I think what Trump has done here is actually dialed down, not dialed up. I know I'm contrarian on this, but I wrote about this in the Telegraph the other day.
No, it was a good piece.
Thank you. But that really actually, in the long run, he actually dials back the temperature, because where the West and Iran was locked was in a position where Iran could continue to ratchet up its outrages without any expectation of any sort of response.
Thank you,
and
Obama.
So, yeah, exactly. And so we have seen the U.S. Embassy attacked in Baghdad. We've seen American troops attacked. We've seen shipping harassed in the Gulf. We've seen rocket attacks through Iranian proxies, and remember, they do everything through proxies. Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen. All of these different groups. And it's also important to remember, we need to be sophisticated about this and understand that these things don't always run on straight Shiite-Sunni lines. That may have once been the case, but that's absolutely not the case anymore. The alliance is now.
How has that changed?
Well, the alliances are now a lot more complex. So you will see Sunnis who will side with Iran out of convenience because they'll have the same aims. So rather than it's not just
what are those aims?
Well, anti-Westernism, getting the West out of the Middle East. I mean, that's one thing, and anti-Israel being the other. So as the United States continues to be close with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia continues to be seen as a linchpin for Trump's grand deal to eventually bring peace to Israel, then other Sunni groups will tie up with Iran, even though historically Sunnis and Shiites were getting it off into some very sort of deep sort of historical, geopolitical, theological waters here. But Iran has always wanted to dominate the Middle East. So there's this thing that's talked about, the Shiite Crescent, where they would have an extension power from Lebanon through Syria, through Iraq to Iran, and then all the way down to the Gulf. And that tied up together presents a huge threat if these guys are determined to take an anti-Western stance. Yeah.
So I was in Israel in July, and I did the research trip where they take you through all the sites, and then the Israeli government gets intelligence officers to brief us. The thing that was really shocking to me all the way back in July, which is actually before the Strait of Hormuz stuff actually escalated, it was a few months before that, they were saying it's not Palestine, it's not anything other than Iran.
Yep.
And they took us to the holes that Iran was digging into Israel. Like, it's just to think that you would side with this regime over the US, which is look, I maybe disagree that it is a de-escalating move.
Well,
but I do think you need to have a disproportionate response when you have a terrorist that's planning attack.
But it's a
proportionate responses are what Obama did, right? And it doesn't do anything. You need to
Obama
hit them
didn't even do proportionate. He did appeasement.
He did appeasement.
Fair enough. Iran never paid any price for what they were doing, and I
would argue that they should pay a disproportionate price, like a drone strike on a leader.
They just lost this general. Now, some of the stupidest things that we've heard. I mean, we've heard people say that he was personally brave, his troops loved him. There was that we've seen so many reactions. Ilhan Omar
these are from the mainstream media.
Ilhan Omar, though, called this an act of war by the United States, and lots of Democrats lined up behind her. Somebody even went so far.
She's
sorry, I got to talk about
being,
this one because this will get us into our next topic here. Bernie Sanders made Bernie, good old Bernie. He said that this made Trump like Vladimir Putin. And he said because this is like Putin assassinating his political rivals in his own country, as if you couldn't see the difference, between like a journalist or a political rival or a military leader who has been attacking your troops.
He's lost his mind.
Well, okay, he's lost his mind, but let's move on to our next topic here, which is the race to the White House, which is actually why we all came together and decided to do this fun little podcast.
Yeah,
and
it's a fun race.
It's a fun race now. This is the thing, Jack, and this struck me the other day. It's absolutely fascinating. We are now in this position where the Iowa caucus, which is traditionally this really big deal thing, it's traditionally very often the winner of the Iowa caucus
wins
goes
the race.
On to be the Democratic nominee. So that's why last time around Hillary Clinton's people fought so hard to win that. And because of the funny system of a caucus, it's not like you don't just go in and you cast a vote. It's this weird thing. You have to drive through the snow, and you spend all night at a table, and you're caucusing, and you're casting round after round after round of ballots, and the tallying system is really, really weird. It's almost like the Duckworth system in cricket to figure out the score. It's a very so there's a lot of people who think, not without cause, that Hillary's people really gamed that system so that she would win Iowa over Bernie Sanders. Now, Iowa again. And this system, by the way, also really biases in favor of progressives, university students, people who have the time to do this sort of thing. So it's very open to activists, which is why progressives like Bernie Sanders do well. We're now, though, at February 3rd for the Iowa caucus, so less than a month away, really 3 or 4 weeks away, and there's no firm favorite. Mm-hmm. This is really looking like, to me,
anyone's race.
Anyone's race, and we're going to see, I think, a long and contested primary here, which is going to, go into a convention where there may still not be a winner, that's clear and apparent. So this is really quite historic, and yet people aren't paying attention. This Iowa caucus 4 years ago, huge amounts of buzz. Whenever there's a Democrat chance to take the White House when they're out of power, there's a huge amount of buzz around this. There's nothing around this. And so we look at the averages of polls, okay? Numbers time. Bernie Sanders in the lead, but barely, with 22% average of polls. Pete Buttigieg, 21.7. Statistically right there.
Incredible.
Statistically right there.
Was he momentarily the leader?
He was last week. Last week the numbers were flipped. It was Mayor Pete at 22, Sanders is about 20. So now Sanders has come back. Mayo Pete has...
I was so wrong about him. He's doing so well.
Well, this is really interesting. He's doing really well, but I just don't think he has any national cut through outside of this sort of far left progressive sort of thing. And then Joe Biden in at 20.3%.
We know roughly why Joe Biden is where he is, because there's been gaffe after gaffe.
Well, Joe Biden is where he is because, he's the establishment candidate, but that's the other thing. We haven't seen huge amounts of establishment money flow to any particular candidate. We haven't seen really big campaign consultant
did you
sign
see the
up
backlash against
for
Pete
one.
Buttigieg's his donors, obviously larger corporations rather than the micro donors, which are funding like Elizabeth Warren
and Sanders. Warren and Sanders are really like, I mean, Elizabeth Warren is getting, tons of $3 donations, and it's all about,
and he made the point at the last debate. He was saying, well, money is money to a degree, and he's like, if you're beholden to the people giving you the money, then you shouldn't be running anyway.
Yeah,
I think that's a pretty good point. They're trying to paint him as being somewhat evil for taking money from people that had more money than the micro donations. It's just a different mechanism of raising funds.
Yeah,
morality
I mean, it's interesting though, because it does, like it ties into a number of things. Because Obama was a complete corporate candidate, like a complete candidate of corporations, of the banks. One of the weird and interesting things that came out of the WikiLeaks emails was an email that Obama's campaign team had essentially confirming who he was going to put in his first cabinet was Citibank. So you can see how there is a degree of corruption that can happen with that sort of thing, and that having lots of micro donations, number one, it means that you are not necessarily beholden to these interests. I do think there is a point to that.
Yep.
And there's also, I think it.
But I guess the counterpoint is if you are the type of person who is vulnerable to that anyway, then you probably shouldn't be running.
Okay, but if you're in honestly, there's a very strong case to be made that if you want to be president, that is almost automatically disqualifying. Because, what sort of nut would want that job? I mean, God, But beyond that, though, let's go back, though. If you've got people who are giving you micro donations, I put in $5 and I'm giving $5 a month to Bernie or whatever that sort of thing is. On a funny psychological level, that means I've got skin in the game. That means I want to see him win. That means in a participation vote election, not a mandatory vote, one where you got to get out the vote, means I'm more likely to get out. It means I'm more likely to tell my friends. There is a case to be made for that.
Micro donations are so unbelievably dodgy, and this is going to rear its head over the next couple of years. It's very hard to track it. A lot of legislative mechanisms to hold donors to account. They often have donation caps. So say, in Australia, we'll look at stuff over $100.
Yeah.
And then Get Up, here, which is a militant activist group here.
Yeah. They're not a political party.
No, but they are now officially a political campaigner, I think is how they're defined.
Yeah.
If they get micro donations under that $100 threshold, they don't have to declare it. So you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know who's paying it. There's no transparency.
There's absolutely
I could break my money up into lots of separate micro donations.
Then it's also like,
it's extraordinary.
If I want to give, say, $10,000, or $100,000, and I don't want to do it in an Aldi shopping bag like somebody in New South Wales Labor.
Yeah.
Then I've got to figure out a way to break that up among that many people.
Yeah.
That's tricky. Who are those people?
A colleague of mine, who I won't name, told me this story that they bought a piece of merchandise when they were over. And this is an Australian citizen, bought a piece of merchandise that inadvertently donated to the Democratic Party.
Right.
And then she gets an email, and you're not supposed to be doing that.
No.
Australians shouldn't be funding.
No. America,
and
unlike
she had to opt out, and they still haven't given her money back. Okay,
that's interesting.
These micro donations, you don't know where the money's coming from. I don't think that they should be morally superior. I think in a couple of years there'll be a reckoning. They'll go back and they'll figure out where it's all come from. It'll come from Russia or all over the place. They don't track it. They only look at the large donations.
That is an interesting point, but I do think there's also an interesting contributions model. A lot of them basically. A lot of candidates, and actually AOC of all people, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she somewhat pioneered this because she started a thing of essentially they call it a Netflix model, where you sign up and every month X dollars goes out, and it might be $12 or something like that, and then suddenly if you sign up enough people like that, you actually wind up, as you suggest, with quite a tidal wave of funds.
Yeah. It doesn't make you morally any superior to somebody that brokered a deal with a certain group of.
Your morality lies in your heart, not in your pocket.
Your morality lies in your actions.
Yes, exactly.
And what you actually do when you're in Congress.
But beyond that, though, on the money thing, Trump is massively outraising any of these guys, like
that's
by
extraordinary.
2-1.
Yeah.
So and I think
is he really?
Yeah. And he, that's been one of the huge drivers of the Trump fundraising machine. Impeachment.
Yeah.
So the Democrats are in a terrible situation here because they're the odds-on favorite to absolutely lose. I mean, I looked at one of the betting sites the other night. I think it was Trump at $1.80. Biden was the next at $5.80.
Wow.
That's just everybody.
And we know the polls can be wrong, but they're often wrong in favour of the Democrats. They're often wrong in favour of the left.
Of the left, like we saw that here in May. We saw that with Boris Johnson. We saw that with Boris Johnson was supposed to be still negotiating a hung parliament right now, and he just romped it in.
I think people are angry, and I think people have every right to be angry. I think when you looked at the impeachment process, it was an absolute rort. I think people that were looking at the lack of evidence that was actually presented during that 3-month trial were very right. And now what's happening?
So now they're delaying taking this to the Senate, and now they're trying to open up the Senate trial to new evidence.
It's like,
rather than
we found new evidence.
What were all the hearings in the House about?
I thought you guys were so certain that you were going to impeach the president. You've impeached him.
And if he's such a threat to national security, don't they want to get him out now?
But the thing is, if the impeachment process was legitimate, which it wasn't, then you don't need any more evidence.
No, exactly. You take it to the Senate, and
because
if these
they
guys
know
were
it was BS. They know it was BS.
If these Democrats were strategic, they would know that this thing is just an absolute disaster, and they would send it to the Senate, let it die, say, the Republicans, they're so terrible, they don't want to, hear any evidence about Trump. Well, we know what's going on, and we're going to keep the pressure on, and then they would just shut up about impeachment, never say another goddamn word about it, and go and try and get somebody into the White House.
I think part of the problem, and I think it's a big part of the problem here for domestic politics in Australia, I think probably politicians in all Western countries, is they spend so much time on Twitter that they think the discourse and they think that the rationale of the Twitterati is somewhat representative of normal voting people.
Yeah, well,
it's not. So they're probably on Twitter. She's getting thousands of likes saying, siding with Iran.
Hey, I'm getting retweets, I'm getting likes.
And she's like, people want this.
Yeah, people want this.
And people don't want this.
Was it Nick Cohen, the British writer, who said, Twitter is not your country?
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely true. Everybody needs to remember that. But the other interesting thing here...
The greatest argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with somebody on Twitter.
Thank you, Mencken. Yeah, that's very Mencken of you. But the great sage of Baltimore. But the fascinating thing about this to me then is that what it allows Trump to do is something that I don't think has ever been done in the history of American presidential campaigns, and that is this. It is to, as a second-term incumbent, run as an outsider.
Yeah.
Like he gets to run against the Washington establishment again, which is his position of strength. So the Democrats have allowed themselves to be dragged into this position now where they are acting exactly like the swamp creatures that Trump rails against. All Democrats need to do, this is so easy, and yet it's so difficult for them. All they need to do is just act normal.
Yeah.
Just send normal people up.
Exactly.
And they can't deal with that. And they can't deal with the idea of even beginning to legitimize the Trump presidency by acting normal. It's like, well, if they just said, okay, well, we lost that election and we're going to, commit to work with this president and we will put up another candidate 4 years later who's going to, hopefully bring us back into the White House. Everybody would say, all right, that's fine. But that would mean that the president is legitimate. For them, 2016 was this great catastrophe. It was this, it was this Nakba moment where the whole world fell apart for them, the whole system fell apart for them, and the guy was the usurper and illegitimate, and therefore any sort of acting like sane and rational people to them is just, that creates legitimacy. But for everybody else in America, they're like, dude, he's your president, get over it. And that's what the Democrats' problem is,
I think as well is
November.
If you're a moderate and then perhaps you don't like Donald Trump and you're looking for an option, the further left the Democratic Party gets pulled by people like AOC and the more progressive policies that like Elizabeth Warren comes forth, this multi-trillion-dollar green fund that she wants other countries to have access to.
Yeah.
People tweeting out support for the Iranian regime.
Yeah.
You say, well, look, I don't like him, but I can't in good conscience vote for these guys.
Yeah, well, exactly.
If I vote for these guys, they're going to start backing the Iranian regime.
So your choice is Donald Trump, who, at least, for all of his faults, doesn't actually seem to actively hate me or my country.
And the economy's going quite well.
Or you've got the Democrats who, will side with absolutely any low-rent dictator,
and it's
thug,
just starting
terrorist,
to look petty and strange.
On foreign policy, and who will, whose economics are completely insane. Who want to have free healthcare for illegal immigrants and have open borders, and free college and free this and free that. Somebody's going to have to pay for that, and middle class Americans just look at that and say, the whole Trump just has to get enough people to hold their nose who don't necessarily love him,
Yeah.
you know, who aren't all MAGA, but just see the Democrats as an existential
And
threat.
I think he does better as well when he's less angry Trump and he's more funny, jovial Trump. Like when he's at his rallies doing his comedy show, that's when he's at his prime.
Shecky Trump.
That is when that is when he absolutely shines. The danger for him would be for him to get too aggressive in the debates and everything. He just needs to sit down the same way that he dismantled Hillary Clinton.
Because like
I went and rewatched the original debates the other day, and it was really a piece of beauty. And I watched the mainstream media's coverage of it, and Hillary Clinton won, and it's not at all what I saw. He was calm, he dismantled her, and he picked her apart piece by piece, and he was funny.
I remember watching Trump rallies when he was first running in 2015, 2016, and you know, and then watching media calls he'd do and the way he'd answer questions and everything like that. And you would see a completely different guy to then what the next day when you were driving in you'd hear on the ABC radio or whatever, you know, talking about, you know, this lunatic madman running for the White House, he can never win, you know. And then if you listen to it, you know, his stuff, it's like, oh, you know, he's entertaining, he's engaged, he's across his brief. You know,
he's no dummy as well.
He's no
they
dummy,
try
but
and
the
paint
thing
him
is,
like
they
a
try and
dummy.
paint him like a dummy. But the thing is that you know, whatever you think about, he's not an idiot. He didn't get where he is today by being an idiot. That's number one. And you have to, you know, Democrats just keep saying,
Mate,
he's
you're not going to
stupid.
get invited to many Hollywood parties.
You know, well,
with that attitude.
Speaking of Hollywood parties, hey, let's go to the biggest Hollywood party of the year. Oh, God. The Golden Globes.
Oh, they love it.
They love it.
It's such a pompous
What
room,
happened?
isn't it?
Can you tell us, Jack, about what happened to the Golden Globes?
Well, one of my favourite human beings, Ricky Gervais, he stood up there.
The office guy?
In front of all, he just consumed all the smuggery. He stood there and he obliterated Hollywood. He obliterated them. Before they get a chance to accept an award, he shamed them for having the audacity to preach morality to normal people when they are probably the heaviest consumers, the biggest carbon emitters. They are the Hollywood hypocrites that we all know and we all, you know, turn a blind eye to. He just destroyed them. It was really a sight to see.
Yeah, no, and it was the really funny thing about that was the reaction, though. Like, everybody I know was just air pumping and cheering and laughing. He said to these guys, he had this great line where he said something along the lines of pretty much, all of you Hollywood hypocrites who want to tell other people how to live, shut up, get up, take your award, and go. You know nothing about the real world. You've spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
And everybody was just like, and then he said, he was going on, he said he had these other fantastic lines. He was saying how you know, he made a joke about Epstein not killing himself and then said, hey, you know, he was your friend, not mine.
He goes, this guy's getting a second season, so obviously he didn't kill himself.
Yeah.
Just like Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
Dead. Everyone
and
dead.
Then
he goes, shut up.
He said, he was your friend, and he called him out. He pointed out, he said, your friend, he's your friend, and
binge watch the entire first season of Afterlife instead of watching this show. That's a show about a man who wants to kill himself because his wife dies of cancer, and it's still more fun than this, okay? Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up. I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
You know, all these people who partied with Epstein.
It's true.
And when he was introducing, I think, Sandra Bullock, and he said...
Did you see Tom Hanks' face?
Yes. Oh, my God. Yeah. And
it's been turned into a GIF.
Yeah, and so he was introducing Sandra Bullock. He said, Sandra Bullock's coming up to give an award. She was in Bird Box, which was a movie about people who had to pretend not to see anything to survive. Just like working with Harvey Weinstein. And everybody was like, oh!
But he's right. There's a lot of women that have a record of working with Weinstein that now are coming out, but they covered for him.
They covered for him because they wanted a part.
They covered for him.
They wanted a part. Yeah. Everybody knew what was going on. Everybody enabled this guy who's now up, you know, on a whole bunch of charges, you know, so it's all alleged, but everybody... stood up for him.
The point is they're about as immoral. They're about as immoral as they can get. And to sit there every time they get their award.
And it's all self-congratulatory.
Like Russell Crowe had Jennifer Aniston read off a thing about the bushfires. I don't want to get too much into that because, you know, there's obviously a lot of people doing it tough.
But then you had, you know, Joaquin Phoenix, I think, making a plea for veganism. You had all sorts of, you know, everybody with their...
I just love that Ricky just took that. He's like, some of you are going to come up here and preach, and if you do, you're a bunch of muppets.
And so there was so much great stuff. Like, the Independent in the UK lost their minds, and they were like, oh, he's drowning out vital political messages. Oh, come on, from Hollywood. The LA Times just, was like, of course, obviously, they're the House Organ of Hollywood and all that. They were just horrified. But then the funny thing was, like, Vox, which is that left-wing website in the States, here's why Ricky Gervais is problematic. And they went trawling through his old jokes about, trans people and things. Say, he's not funny. You're not allowed to laugh at this. And then Slate, which is, Slate, what do these people want? Like, a movie option on their explainer columns?
He's not one of them. He still lives in the UK. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's a borderline comic genius. He didn't become filthy rich until he was 40. Yeah. Right? He was actually struggling up until then.
There's hope for you yet, Jack.
There's still hope for me yet. I might get there. But he is a borderline comic genius. Yeah. And he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
And these Hollywood
people, and he just
people,
sat there and just fired off shots. It was amazing.
It just shows how humorless they are, and how, and again, it's this preachy thing that they do where it's all about, our causes, our this, our that, and you guys out there in the real world, you've got to live with what we're telling you to say, and then we're going to get on our private jet and
just the funniest thing for me was a reaction from the celebrities as he's doing it. Tom Hanks just wouldn't do it. And then you've also had like the woman from the Gilmore Girls who just was not enjoying it at all.
Yeah.
A couple of them are laughing at themselves. They're like, yeah, look, we do suck.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
mainly, these people legitimately think that they are these heroes saving humanity. I mean, flying around with their private jets to go and then preach climate change.
Yeah, no, it's a joke.
It is just ridiculous.
It's a joke. They're a joke. But I think this is not a joke. This has been a great first 2020 for 2020.
Definitely, and there's going to be much more. Obviously, we're going to ramp it up. The race is heating up. So make sure that you leave some comments below.
We are here with you every week through the election. And, leave your comments. We'll read out some great comments next week on the air. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.